Hello again, everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about globalization in Independence Day. Try to cover that topic. This is going to be a little tricky, a little weird. Normally, when I do this part of the lesson, I have a couple of videos that I would show during class, and then we would talk about. Um, so I tried to, order everything so that you would watch this, and then at a couple different points during this video, I'm going to tell you basically to pause this one and switch to one of the other YouTube videos that I have. Well, I guess this is also, I guess I'm a YouTube video as well, but the ones that aren't me talking. Um, so I have those two other ones that you might have seen posted on Moodle. I think one of them it says like video globalization. They all say that, and then one is IMF, and then the other two are a trailer and some clips from this documentary. So there's three videos on Moodle. So I'll tell you. I'm going to set it up a little bit, and then I'll tell you at what point you should go watch that. Okay. So globalization. You might be familiar with this term. A quick kind of definition of globalization is that it's an economic term, and it's kind of the phenomenon of having like a worldwide economic system, right? Like obviously how clothes and shoes and things like that in America, a lot of them are made in China or Taiwan or India, places like this. Um, so that whole phenomenon of like making things across the world, shipping them in, that is globalization. So maybe like that's the most common way we think about it. But also more like simpler things like being able to get pineapples in New Jersey in February, right? Or really at all, I guess. I guess we really can't grow pineapples at any time. Yeah, it's just kind of this economic arrangement where things are grown in parts of the world and they're shipped all over parts of the world, right? So I'm going to try to explain kind of the arguments for and against globalization, because I think we need this background context to understand what's going on with this topic in the story, right? Because I think with globalization, especially with the story, it's kind of like there's this already existing argument, and we can look at the story as kind of taking a position within that argument. Okay, so and I will say also, I'll try to explain each side, fairly and all that. Obviously, I have my own opinions, and it probably, will show up at some point. I'll try to make it clear when I'm just giving my own opinion, and when I'm giving you kind of the objective, whatever. But I think everyone's, your opinion, I think, always affects stuff, even if you're a teacher. Um, okay, so the pro-globalization argument. I think the number one way to make this part is that ultimately globalization is good for the consumer, right? That why do we have shirts that are made in China? Well, because it's cheaper if we do it that way. How could it possibly be cheaper to do it all the way across the world and ship it over? Because they pay the workers very little. We know how this works in terms of sweatshops and things. Um, but ultimately, it results like you're able to go to Walmart and get a shirt for $5, right? If we didn't do this, if all T-shirts were made in America, you might go to Walmart and Walmart might not exist or whatever, but you go to buy a shirt and it's $20. You can't get that $4 T-shirt that you're able to find at some of these places. So I think that's the first way people will try to say it's a good thing, is that ultimately it gets cheaper prices for the people like buying stuff in that country, right? And the other part of the argument that they would make is that globalization helps everyone, right? That even though as Americans we might look at somebody in a sweatshop making whatever $2 a day or something, and we'd say, well, that's terrible. $2 a day is nothing. Obviously, $2 in another country is worth more than it is here. It could be more money than they would make otherwise, right? If your options are whatever, digging a ditch or working on a farm or whatever, and making even less than $2 a day, then obviously it looks better from that perspective. So they would say that it helps everyone, right? They would look at a country like China or something, and be like, okay, well, since China started having sweatshops, when was that? In the 80s, 90s? I don't know. But that since then, their economy's improved so much, the standard of living has gone up, all of these sorts of things, right? And that ultimately, like the workers make more now than they did in the 90s and things like that. So the argument would be, well, ultimately, it helps everybody, right? So to kind of I think I do want to turn to the first video soon. So the first video that I have for us, it's kind of like an explainer video, kind of a mission statement put out by this international like monetary, well, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So the IMF that I'm gonna have us watch this video about, they're basically like an international bank, you know, where they give out loans to countries, right? It's like if there's some kind of disaster in a maybe a smaller nation that doesn't have as much money, if there's a war or some kind of natural disaster, they can go to the IMF and the World Bank and organizations like this, and they'll give them a loan, right? And as we'll see in this video, the IMF tries to say, oh, well, we're just here to help. Like, if you're in a tough time, we'll help you out. But I think as being in a college class, I think we all know if someone is trying to, if someone's going to give you a loan, are they really trying to help you? I think we know that no is the answer to that, right? Because of course there's interest and everything like that. And not only that, not only would they want interest on these loans, but they would also sometimes require the countries, who need these loans to like feed their people or keep the lights on or whatever. They would require them if they were going to give them a loan, they'll say, okay, fine, we'll give you the loan, and you'll pay us back more, and also you need to change the laws that you have so that we can send multinational corporations into your country and allow them to open up there. Because a lot of smaller countries will try to keep that stuff out, right? They'll try to have their own smaller businesses, and try to keep out multinational companies and things like this. So they'll say, yeah, we'll give you a loan, but you have to change your laws, and you have to let Nike come and build a factory, and also you'll pay us interest. All right, so maybe pause this video right now and go watch the IMF one, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, and now we're back from watching the video. So that video bothers me on so many levels. I hate like the music, the stock music, like the stock photos. Did you notice the one scene when they're in a boardroom and they're just passing back and forth a bunch of like blank pie charts? Like it's just like footage of a building getting built. It's like, oh, okay, that's that's what's happening. Okay, so a couple of things that stick out. Number one for me is probably the very last thing that they say in the video. They say something like, countries of the world working together for the good of all. So I think that's kind of how we can sum up the pro-globalization arguments. For the good of all, ultimately, we're helping everyone, right? Actually, Nigeria, actually, the oil company's doing you a favor by being there, right? Because your country's GDP can grow and your people can get jobs at the oil company, Okay, so that's kind of the pro side, right? With the biggest things being that they say it's best for the consumer, and that they claim that ultimately it'll help like the people in both of the countries, right? Okay, so the argument against this, and I will say that is a very popular argument for globalization. I would say, a lot of economists and probably almost every American politician, except maybe one or two, pretty much every American politician, I think, believes the fundamentals of globalization like that, the way it's set up in the IMF video. But there's also an argument against globalization. Okay, so the argument against it, I think it starts by pointing out that ultimately, when we say, oh, the consumers benefit, oh, the people in the other countries benefit, who's really benefiting, right? Who is ultimately benefiting? And the answer to that is the giant corporations, right? It is the big corporations, because you can say, oh, well, workers in China make $2 an hour more now than they used to since sweatshops came in. It's like, okay, fine, that might be true. Compare the $2 to the $2 trillion, what, like the $2 billion? I don't know how much money we would want to say, but when you compare it to what the corporation is making, like it's still hard to justify it, like there's still, hugely, I would say, taking advantage of these workers. Even though you could say, oh, well, the workers chose to have the job and all that, at the same time, the money that Nike makes from the shoe is an insane amount more than they're paying the worker to make it. And like, you could say, oh, well, they should, they're entitled to make a profit or whatever. It's like, okay, maybe. Are they entitled to make, to 99.9% of the profits? I don't know. I don't know about that. At some point, someone's got to put the shoe together, someone's got to stitch it up. Um, so you can say that ultimately the corporations are the ones making billions off this. They're the ones who are really benefiting. Um, there's another economic idea. Uh, this is kind of an economic phrase. It's called the race to the bottom. And this idea is that if like we with the setup of globalization, right, where what you're basically going to do in this paradigm is put your factory or whatever in the country where it's going to be the cheapest to do that, right? That's the whole point because you're trying to make the most money possible. That's the only that's the whole game. So you're going to put it in the country where you're going to be able to make the most money. Which countries are those going to be? The ones with the worst labor laws and the ones with the worst environmental laws. Because obviously, I think people rightly focus on the workers in these places and the terrible conditions and the long hours and the low pay and all of that stuff. And of course, that should be focused on. But because obviously, taking care of those things costs the company money, right? It would cost them more money to have a safe environment where everyone's well taken care of. But it would also cost them more money if they had to responsibly dispose of their waste, or if they had to, install new systems to make less emissions or whatever, right? So the race to the bottom, the idea of this is that you're racing to the country with the worst laws, basically. That it incentivizes countries to like let these multinational corporations come in and basically just like wreck the place for a while until the workers can accumulate enough power and money to try to like get better laws and stuff. But then if you get better laws, the companies can just leave. They'll just go somewhere else, right? And I think that's why they've kind of moved out of China at least a little bit compared to I think what it was in like the early 2000s or something. I think that's why you see like like Bangladesh or these are Vietnam, these other places now because they're racing to the bottom. So I think that is a pretty convincing idea as well. All right, so the way that I want us to kind of look at some videos here that I would say are against globalization is from both of these videos. They're from this documentary. It's called Life and Debt. Um, it's a documentary about Jamaica and about once Jamaica got independence in I think like the 60s. They were an English colony. They get independence, and then these videos are kind of about like the economic stuff after that. How basically through globalization and organizations like the IMF, um, European and American and Europe and North American countries are able to kind of still maintain control over a tiny country like Jamaica, right? All right, so maybe we should just stop now and go and watch those. So I guess you could just watch both of them. There's the trailer, and then there's the one with the clips from the documentary. So I guess go ahead and watch those, and then I'll see you back here. So in that first video, the trailer, I just think it gives us like an interesting picture of all the stuff. You see the guy from the IMF like speaking on TV, and everyone just kind of like watching skeptically, right? He like mispronounces the word poor and stuff. So I think it just gives us a nice contrast between like the kind of like theoretical philosophical language and then like what's actually happening on the ground in a country like Jamaica, right? But obviously the second video. Has a lot more meat to it. So okay, one thing I think actually this might be in the trailer. It's the I think it's the guy they interview who's like the former prime minister or something like that. And the quote that he gives, he says talking about Jamaica, when they became free, they found themselves in all kinds of financial problems. So I think this is really key that they kind of draw like this comparison to being under colonialism to now being kind of trapped in all this debt, right? And in the very last part of the second video, the like professor who they're talking about, he talks about he says foreigners having more control over the economy. This is the key part, not through direct control, but through the mechanism of debt, right? So I think that maybe the strongest critique against globalization is that is it is in fact a kind of neo-colonialism or a neo-imperialism, that it's basically a new model for the wealthier countries to control the smaller, poorer countries. In whatever in the 17, 1800s, England goes into India, or well, I guess before that, whatever. In the previous phase of history, like England would go into these countries, right, and take them over and conquer them, and now that's part of England's empire, right? That's what they did with America and all these other places. That was colonialism, right? And it was very easy to see. It was political control. They would come in there and say, now this is the property of England. Um, so they're calling this process neo-colonialism, in that it's just a new version of it. So they're yeah, very very against this idea of globalization, and it's basically that because like the prime minister guy says, as soon as they become independent, they're immediately in debt, right? So they're like, okay, you can have your independence, but you owe us $100 billion. And your country, in some cases, I don't know if it's the case in Jamaica, but definitely in some cases it's like your country just went through a war or something too, so you probably need money from that aspect. And then they're like, oh, okay, so you're in all this debt. Oh, you need a loan now. So then the IMF gets involved, and then they, as a condition of giving them a loan, force them to open up for trade in terms of all the things that they showed with the vegetables and the milk and all that. And basically, what happens is that all the farms and things in Jamaica go out of business because they can't compete with the much cheaper vegetables and things that are grown elsewhere and then flown in. Um, so yeah, this is kind of the argument against it, that it kind of fundamentally compromises the independence of, in this case, Jamaica, because they're constantly in debt in this way, and they basically have to do whatever the IMF and these world organizations want, because they owe them so much money and there's no way to get out of it. Um, so yeah, so I think this is maybe now to turn to our story. So we see kind of these two arguments, right? The pro-globalization, anti-globalization. So if we're now looking at the story of Independence Day, right? So I think that's a good way to bring it in, because ultimately they say in that last video that it's an issue of independence, that it makes you dependent because of the debt and the money and all, and the way it works with the corporations and stuff. Um, so in Nigeria, in the story, right, I think the oil companies are the biggest representative of globalization. Summit Oil, I think it's a real company, or at least it was. It's a Dutch company. Um, and yeah, Nigeria's biggest asset is its oil. That is a real life thing. Nigeria really does produce a huge amount of oil. Um, so I think like what we can see there is you now have this foreign company, right? This company that's based in the Netherlands, controlling the biggest asset of a country like Nigeria, which was also a colony not that long ago. I think in the 50s maybe Nigeria gets its independence, also from England, right? So then once they're now independent, we see it's still a case where foreign companies have control over the most valuable resources, the oil in this case. So if we go back to, I'm just going to read a little bit from one part of the story, Independence Day. So this is where Madam Queen gives this big speech on page 13, right? I just want to read some of this. So this is kind of starting in the middle of page 13. It says, the oil companies, they drill our fathers' farms and they don't give we their children jobs. We eat okra, cassava grown in other parts of the country. We use their yam, plantain, and palm oil to cook our onunu. There are no fish in our rivers, no bush rats left in our forests. We don't use natural gas in our homes, and yet we have gas flares in our backyard. We can't find kerosene to buy, but we have pipelines running through our land. Some of us don't have electricity. Some of us don't have candles to burn. So I really like some of those lines. We don't have gas in our homes, but we have pipelines in our backyards. So I think that's a really nice kind kind of set up a nice juxtaposition in terms of like who benefits from this, which is I think the question I had for you on the assignment sheet. Was like, according to the story, who benefits from globalization? So I think we can see that the benefits of gas and oil and kerosene and things that are being the resources that are in Nigeria, they're clearly not going to the people of Nigeria the way the story presents it to us. They're going to pipelines that taken out of the country to Europe or America or wherever. Um, Going on a little further on page 13, she says, I'm telling you, as we speak, we are dying. We're dying of our air. We're dying of our water. We are dying from oil. We are not benefiting from it. So I think that is kind of the most clear statement you can make, right? We are not benefiting from it. Who does it benefit? Clearly not actually the people of Nigeria. So what I think we can see is the story making a kind of argument against globalization here, right? And also, obviously, all the environmental stuff throughout the story about the environmental problems it's causing. So I think another thing you could write about for this essay is kind of seeing like how does the story get involved in this larger argument about globalization? And I think your answer to that question will then give you something like a thesis that you can write about. All right, that's it for now. See you.